Hello and welcome to Chat DPS, where this week we're joined by the esteemed Adam Green, and we're going to talk about picking your framework, then understanding what goes on within the incident room. So you pick a framework so you actually understand what's going to go on within the incident room. But we're going to cover things like documentation and comms plans and desktop exercises, just to make sure that people are aware of what actually happens when the brown stuff really does hit the fan. We're really fortunate in that we've got a CISO perspective as well as a legal perspective on this. So obviously with Robert being a lawyer, Adam being the CISO. Unfortunately, the other Adam, Cunningham, is not feeling on top of the world today, so we won't be joined by him, but Adam Green is going to be giving us a huge perspective on this. So guys, pick your framework to begin with, but as it pertains to the documentation, the incident response, the comms plan, and the desktop exercises, can we start with documentation first, Adam? What's the important thing here? I mean, obviously we're talking about things like NIST or FIPS or something along those lines, right?
Yeah, so I do a lot of documentation and incident response review, or even writing from scratch, because you'd be surprised how many organizations are still running with no incident response plans. It is getting a lot better, but they still do run without them. I always start with SAN 6 steps because I think the SAN 6 steps aligns nicely with the process that we go through, where it's like prepare, and prepare is actually getting the documentation done. And then you've got, and I should know this because I do it every day, but detect, eradicate, and then detect, contain, eradicate, recover, and lessons learned. Obviously, prepare being number one. So when we follow that flow, then you can actually write your documentation, the indicators of compromise, and all the different types of incident response playbooks can all play to that same flow. And then that aligns nicely when you think about MITRE ATT&CK, and it also aligns nicely when we think about the Lockheed kill chain and how that plays out in an incident. So when you put all of that together in a document, then it actually flows nicely. You'll find that there's what we see a lot more now is a lot of organizations have got a crisis management or an incident management workbook for something like operational health and safety, or if they've got some form of physical security breach. So we try to align, and sometimes it's a bit of a round peg in a square hole situation, but we try to align our documentation to fit with something that they're familiar with, and then we put the SAN 6 steps through that documentation. But because in a true incident response war room, there's going to be a lawyer and there's going to be a CISO, and generally when the lawyer's in the room, the CISO shuts up and doesn't talk. So I'm actually going to hand over to Robert now and get Robert's perspective on it.
Sure. Well, I guess there's a few things to say. Yeah, so I completely agree with Adam. It's good to start with some sort of framework reference before you start diving into the detail of the documentation, start sort of getting into the detail of MITRE attacks and all that kind of stuff. It's like, so whether it's SAN 6 or NIST is very kind of big picture, because it kind of looks at the entire security posture of an organization, almost from a business perspective as well. So response there as one of the key factors within that framework, but governance wraps around everything. So and this is all about, well, recognizing what sort of organization you are, what sort of sector do you sit in. Are you in health? Are you in finance? You think about the sort of regulators that you deal with. You think about standards that you need to comply with. Do you deal with credit card information? So do you need to comply with PCI DSS? So you're looking at the overall big picture, and then you're flowing down from there. What are your policies? What are your plans, your processes, your procedures? And incident response comes into that, but it all kind of fits together, and it goes up into your overall framework, where you're looking at what assets do we have, how do we detect if there's any issues, how do we protect our data, how do we respond, incident response, how do we recover, so what's our DRs, and it's that kind of big picture thinking that you need to think about it. And as Adam mentioned as well, there's roles for different people within organization that gets identified as part of your planning. Who are the key players that you need to have in the room? Because you need the technical people, because I'm sure as Adam will speak to, that the first sort of couple of hours or so, people are just going, what the heck is going on? And it's really hard to figure out exactly what the root cause is. You need the legal people there to kind of go, okay, well, if in these circumstances, we've got to notify X, Y, and Z. It might be a regulator. You might be publicly listed. You've got to think about communications to the ASX. You've got to be thinking about communications to shareholders, the board, the chairman. And then you need to be thinking about, okay, do we need to engage forensics? How do we ensure that what we're doing, do we want to protect that underprivilege? And so we will be thinking about that sort of thing. And the lawyers will tend to sit in the middle if they want to use privilege to protect any additional consultancy work that needs to be done, whether you need to go to a third party to do forensics or do other investigations. The legal person has to sort of sit there and figure out all of those things while the technical guys are sort of, steaming ahead trying to figure out what exactly has gone wrong and how do they recover.
Yeah. So, Adam, I mean, coming back to you on this, because, I mean, you're a veteran of many different war rooms. Who's in the room for these things, generally speaking? Who actually sits in those rooms?
So early days, it was interesting who would sit in the room because there was no planning behind it. And it was just a lot of people sitting there and, a lot
Looking
of blood
at
on the
each other.
walls. Yeah, like pointing fingers everywhere, and you've got vendors and all these people, and you're like, what are you doing in the room? Who are you? Where are you from? But now, like, it's a lot more organized. Boards are a lot more aware of cybersecurity now, and cybersecurity is in everyone's conversations. Incident response and recovery is in everyone's conversations. And another thing that in incident response plans that I put together, there's a swim lane of who does what in every single step of the 6 steps in the incident response framework. And that clearly identifies who's in the room. Number one, you've got to identify who's your incident management leader or crisis management leader. So incident management leader is not every single time, but is always someone who is like in the head of technology or something. So to be a CISO or to be a CIO. And then, because you don't really want your CEO or your head of your board to be your incident commander, because they have to make other kinds of decisions and they don't have the context on the technical side of things. And if you don't rein in the technical people, then it can become a very quick downhill slope. Because one thing that we know from, you referenced stuff, I'm a veteran from war rooms. I've been in over 20 active war rooms. And what's clear is incident response is a business response, not a technical response. The technical part happens under the covers. So what Robert said about communication is absolutely vital. And another thing that we do very clearly in our incident response planning, sitting, like when you sit with an organization and go, or organizations I've been organizing our own incident response for, is like, before the brown stuff hits the wall, as you said, you want to know what your processes are around like regulatory triggers. So, and Robert referenced this as well. It's like, do we go to the OAC for Australia? Do we have to activate anything for SOCI? Do we have to go to the ASX? Do we have to go for the Minister for Transport? And do we have to go for the Minister for Health? Like, so those regulatory triggers are part of what goes into the planning as well. The other thing that's actually really important that a lot of organizations don't think about until it's too late is actually around forensics, around incident response, technical work that gets done to find what happened and trace it back. Now, if you go by your cyber insurance, you get given the cyber insurer's incident response people. So you're instantly activating your cyber insurance. Now, that sometimes creates a bit of a delay in a response to an incident because it's like, we don't want to call insurance until we know what's really happened. Where best practice is to have an incident response retainer with a third party. You inform your cyber insurer that's what you've got. So that's your preferred forensic pathway. And then that way you can actually activate your forensic pathway before you're pulling the trigger on your insurance. And then your forensic provider is the one who would go, you should activate your insurance here. Or we recommend that you get your insurance involved. So it's just all that pre-planning. And then you keep your war room as tight as possible. Only the people that need to be in the war room, they should be in the war room, because one thing that happens is if you don't have clear communication, and that's internal communication with your staff, that's external stakeholder communication, that's communication with because everyone's federated now, right? So it's communication with your third party supply chain. if you don't have that communication already planned out and understood before any incident response is activated, then that's where we actually see stuff show up in the news, and the response comes out as, this was a really poor response. But if done right and planned correctly, some incidents that occur actually make careers for people. Like, there's been many examples of excellent incident responses because they were just so well prepared that it actually became almost good publicity that they had the attack. So really well planned response gives you a really good outcome.
So, Robert, I mean, sort of like who makes the calls in these sort of like scenarios? I mean, and in those incident responses, I mean, there's obviously an identified individual that does communications and is responsible for it. We've also learnt over the years that have these decisions made beforehand, so you're not making stressed decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And the ability for you to be aligned with your culture and your values sounds to me to be like really important. Is that aligned with your thinking still?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, again, just to, confirm what Adam said, you just got to identify who those key decision makers are in the room. And this is also from a business perspective as well. So if you need your C-suite in there or key members of the C-suite, they should be part of that. And as Adam says, you should have all your external advisors lined up as well. So that's legal, crisis management, forensic. And like with insurers, it's a good idea, as Adam said, to sort of have your own advisors lined up, because the insurer will want to put their advisors in place. And so they'll need to, I think it's probably a good idea to clear it with your insurer that, hey, these are the people we're going to use. Are you comfortable with that? Because they want to use their own ones. And so you want to, it's all part of that preparation. And like you say, I think it's really important to have communications almost ready to go. So draft them up. Obviously, tweak them as needed. Is it ransomware? Is it some other
Good
data
point.
exfiltration? Have it all lined up. Communications to the ASX, have it all ready to go, and then you just tweak it as necessary. But I think you make an important point. You also need to make sure you communicate to your internal teams so they know what's going on. So they're not, because as we have probably spoken about in other pods, this is an incredibly stressful time. So you've also got to be thinking about, so that there's potentially staff who are going to be working this 24/7 for a number of days to try and fix this, because as part of that sort of early, or what's just happened, you're trying to identify, okay, is this affecting all customers? Is it just affecting a few customers? What is the impact of this particular incident that we're responding to? And if, like I say, if there's staff that's going to have to work 24/7 until they recover the situation, then you need to be thinking about communicating to them internally, and you need to be providing them support as well. So this is not just about dealing with the incident itself, but thinking about staff and how you're going to actually rotate them through 24-hour shifts, how you're going to provide support for them after that as well. I think we've seen from other sort of conferences and discussions that people can essentially get PTSD from the sort of stress they go through going through one of these major incidents.
Yeah, we've heard about the Marks and Spencer situation recently, where there was some PTSD reported off of the back of that particular incident. But I think that I would like to pick up on this one point. It's assumed always that there's a sort of like a ransomware attack or whatever. What other kind of incidents would there be that would actually require a war room to be set up in the first place?
Yeah, so like we do give a lot of attention to ransomware, and ransomware gets all the headlines and highlights. But like if you look at like Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, and NTT's got one that's similar, and I should probably remember what that's called as well. Like as CISOs, we look at, even though it's looking in the rear view, you do look at what comes out of the breach investigation reports from the various credible sources, and it gives you a little bit of an understanding of where you should actually start to push your strategy, because it gives you an idea. And what's been identified in a lot of those breach investigation reports is that ransomware only makes up around about 6 to 10% of what we actually see, but it gets all the headlines. And then it's interesting because if you actually look at it, ransomware is the thing that got seen last, but how did it all start? So it all started, it was like curb roasting or credential theft or really poor practices that just meant that they could walk straight through the door. Business email compromise. It's like 92% of organizations have experienced business email compromise. And when you have a business email compromise, that's very damaging, because now you've got someone impersonating as the organization. And I've personally dealt with countless calls, I couldn't even guess how many, where they're like, hey, we've just received this email. It looked like it came from one of our suppliers. There was an attachment, and the attachment is now acting funny. Yeah. So we believe that something's happened. And then it's like, well, we need to talk to that third-party provider because they've been compromised, and now you've been compromised off the back of them, but you're one of their supply chain. So you've got business email compromise. You've got just, there's people clicking on things that create just, standard viruses and worms and Trojans and all the things we talk about. Then you've got more sophisticated stuff where it's an advanced persistent threat or an APT. And those ones, they do some sophisticated things to avoid detection, where they'll do like a jigsaw component where it's like they'll bring the payload in like 3 or 4 different pieces and put it in different places within your network, and they mean nothing. And then, because, statistically, there's around about 6 months is the average that they'll be in doing reconnaissance before they pull any triggers or trip any wires, if they don't trip the wires before they plan to. And then they'll go pull all 4 pieces of the jigsaw or 3 pieces of the jigsaw together, and then that creates the payload, which, if it had have been brought in as one big payload, a lot of our modern security technology would be able to detect that that's what it was and stop it on the spot. But when it comes through as a jigsaw, they can't do that. So there's all these different types of attacks. And then, as we were speaking about pre-starting this, like, there's been many times I've been called in to assist where their organizations believe they're under attack. And it's turned out it was like a vendor software update that they've applied the patch, and they haven't tested it before they've applied it, and it's gone and broken. Yeah. So not to name names, CrowdStrike, but there was also, like, there was one that I was working on, and it was like, it was so confusing, and it took us hours to figure this out. But we're like, server went down, server's back. This server went down, now that server's back. And then we were like, what's going on? And it was actually, there was a Rapid7 forced over the wire update that was going through, and it was going server by server. And then, so it was breaking the server operating system, or the way the server was working with the rest of the network, and knocking it offline. And then they'd bring it back online and it'd knock itself back offline again. And then when we figured it out, it was like, hang on, there's a software update that's rolling through. So we're able to actually advise them to stop the software updates from auto updating. And then that saved the rest of the server farm. And then they had to go back and roll back the software on all the others. And it wasn't necessarily there was a bad patch from the vendor. It's just that the way that their estate was, or their network was built, that software update actually broke their connectivity to everything else. So that was a war room where they actually thought they were under active attack, but it was actually their configuration that was bringing them down. It wasn't an active attack. So that's the point about if you use your own forensics versus if you using a cyber insurance, because in that case, they would have activated cyber insurance thinking we're under attack. So hit the button, get the cyber insurers in, but instead it was their technical team sat there and sort of figured out what was going on with a few incredible nudges and questions. But then I do want to caution that you shouldn't, you'd always want to be overcautious and pull the trigger and go, it wasn't a real attack, versus sitting back, waiting, seeing what is, and then going, all right, now this is an attack. Because to Robert's point about internal communication, like the most scary thing that happens when any IT calamity happens, whether it's like a failed hard drive or it's an attack, it's a ransomware, is as a staff member, and you're an organization with a lot of staff, as a staff member, your first thought is, oh crap, am I going to get paid? Yeah. And so A lot of work I do is around, well, your first point of communication is this is how you communicate to your staff that they are still going to have, they're still going to see their pay come through, and there may be missed overtime or there may be missed bonuses if this continues, but you will get paid what you've been getting paid as an average over the last
these are the systems that you keep up on. They're called business essential systems or something along those lines. So bare minimum or something along the lines that you've got to keep going. So Robert, the idea here is the fact that, sort of like the pushing the right buttons at the right moment. And I mean, having that right level of counsel inside of the incident room so that you achieve the desirable outcome rather than an undesirable one. And Adam's highlighted a couple of points there where, if you've gone early, then you've missed the whole point. Yeah,
potentially. But I think it all comes down to preparation.
Yeah.
And a part of that is making sure that you do your testing as well. So because look, I mean, even if you may not quite get the right root cause first time out, you might be sort of jumping at a few shadows to begin with. Like I said, those first few hours. Adam's given that example there. People just running around, just trying to figure out, as I say, who's impacted. And yeah, you may go down a few rabbit holes and make a few mistakes. But I think as long as you have a structure to work to, you have communications to work to, people understand their roles and responsibilities, it should keep you on track. And that's where the preparation comes in, and that's where the testing comes in. Because even if you go off a little bit off track here or there, the journey you're on in terms of responding and recovering, you should stay overall on track, and that's the important thing.
And so this is what is now referred to as, sort of like a desktop exercise, I'm guessing. And this is really where, advice around test is the what happens when the big red button gets pushed. So Adam, sort of like what happens when the big red button does get pushed? I mean, sort of like who makes that first phone call? Is it the CIO? Somebody along those lines and, sort of like, hey, look, we need you in the office to do this right now. We need you online to do this right now. Is what actually happens there? I mean, these desktop exercises are an essential part of, like as you guys have both indicated, the more you practice, the better you get at it.
Yeah. So was it Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face? That actually used to be like graffitied on the wall of one of my offices.
Yeah.
When I worked with a foreign national defense joint venture that was focused entirely on cyber warfare scenarios. And yeah, we used to say and I say this every day, it's you train like you fight so that when you have to, you fight like you train. He's like, so you get this superstar football team. We're talking global football, right? So you get Maradona and Beckham, and I clearly don't follow the sport, so I can't think of any other names.
You got a world-class forward.
Yeah. So you get guns, you get all the guns, and you go, this is the Harlem Globetrotters of soccer. And they're all a bunch of superstars because let's face it, when we interview people in cybersecurity, they all say they're superstars. And then cyber's a bit of a pissing contest, right? And then so we get the best of the best. And then we say to them, now you're in this team, sit there and watch videos or do whatever and make sure the pitch is nice and cut, like you can go and look after the field, and we'll let you know when you're playing. And then eventually they'll get a call, and they don't get called at like 10 a.m. and go, hey, all right, here's who we're playing against. So the call will come at 3 a.m. They don't know who they're playing against, and they actually don't even know who their teammates are. So when they rock up at the ground, they don't know who's enemy, who's friend. That's how a cyber incident looks if you don't do any practice. So it's like get your people in a room and actually drill and drill and drill. There's different ways of doing it. Organizations do red teams, and there's red teams where only a select few will know. So like Adam Cunningham, as an example, would be one of the select few who would know if there was going to be a red team against his organization if it was done in that way. I don't like that way of doing things because it's like, it instills a culture of paranoia, because you don't know that the red team exercises occurred until you failed. And it's the same thing as a phishing simulation. Like phishing simulations are amazing and they should be done all the time. But a lot of organizations and a lot of vendors do phishing exercises that are, you failed, now watch this really annoying video. The way that I always run these things, and I always recommend these things get run, is you actually give everyone the heads up and you show them examples of what it's going to look like, because you want people to learn. And you actually want to create a culture of vigilance rather than a culture of paranoia. There's one example. I was working with an organization, and it started with doing I did a social engineering workshop with them, and it was meant to be like a 1-2 hour, let's talk about social engineering, and then here, this is what we're doing next. Ended up in like 4 hours, and then people are coming up and showing me their Facebook and how do I deal with this? I was like, oh God, this is the people who are running these companies. It's like, it's amazing that, and things have got a bit better of late, but a lot of people don't realize just how much is available and can be learnt about them by just looking at their social footprints. And if it's not them, it's other people posting about them or something that they did as part of an organization or a volunteer work they did. But so we did this social engineering workshop, and then I said, we're going to run this campaign, we're doing this phishing, it's all going to go ahead, we're gamifying it. So the department with the most reports of suspected phishing wins the prize, and we take you out for lunch. I get a phone call from the CEO of the organization like 4 weeks later, and he said, this phishing campaign you're running is the most successful cybersecurity thing we've done. I'm really impressed. And I went, I'm really concerned. And he goes, why? And I went, you never said yes to running the phishing campaign. He goes, what? What do you mean? And I went, I sent you the paperwork and you ghosted me. And he's like, do you mean this stuff's real? And I went, potentially. And then he goes, well, you better start right now. And I went, well, you probably don't need me to start anymore, because it sounds like your team's doing great. Like, you've had one phishing email reported in the history of your company. And then 4 weeks after I walk out of the room, you're at like 100 and something. Job done. But so maybe you should get some phishing, you should get some email security.
So what it does do is it highlights the fact that if you're talking about it at your team meetings, if you've got all these things. Robert, I am interested, because what this is highlighting is the fact that there's different types of documentation and there's different types of exercise that need to be done all the way through. So you've got those technical and operational ones, and obviously your interest is going to be around regulatory and protection of the business reputation, protection of a range of different things in the business, and also liabilities. So, I mean, in terms of documentation from a legal perspective, how might those differ to the words that Adam's been able to share with us? Are they aligned? Are they, in the same, sort of ilk, or are they just different?
Well, I think it's a little bit like I touched on at the beginning. Yeah, you've got to right size your governance framework and all the documentation that sits under it to the sector that you're in, the business that you're in. Are you a health organization? Are you a finance organization? Are you subject to the Privacy Act? So do you turn over more than $3 million? Are you subject to SOCI? Do you do PCI DSS? Who are your key stakeholders? Are they government? Do you need to be notifying regulators within 72 hours or less, whether that's here or overseas? Where are your stakeholders? Are they global? Where are your vendors? Are they here? Are they overseas? So all of your communications it's a patchwork, it's a matrix, and it's very much depending on your organization, which is why you have to do that step back at the beginning. Okay, so this is the organization we are. These are the laws that we're subject to, federal laws, state laws, overseas laws. Is there something impacting? Do I have customers in Europe? Are they impacted? Do I need to think about GDPR and reporting there? Are there customers in the US? Do I need to think about laws over there? So you and this is part of the preparation. So you right size your GRC, your documentation to exactly what your organization is. Is it a private company? Is it a public company? So this is the ASX thing. But if it's private, are there shareholders that I need to get hold of at some point? Where are they based? And so you need to be thinking about, if I've got to make a call at 3 a.m., are my vendors actually going to be online to actually take that call? If I need to call the key shareholder and they live in the US, am I going to be able to raise them for a decision? So these are all things you've got to work through and be aware of.
Yeah, yeah. So I suppose summing up then, what we're saying is, look, make sure that you actually understand that, starting with a framework is a great idea. You need to understand what your documentation is. If you're going to have an incident response, you need to know who's in the room and what their roles are, because their roles may be a little bit different to what they are outside of the room. Comms plans, have those comms plans, prepared. Understand whether, if in the case of a ransomware, are you actually going to pay that ransomware? Make that decision beforehand so that you're, what the circumstances are that you might actually do something, right? Well, make sure you've got to
Don't forget, got to report it now under the Cyber
report it.
Act.
Absolutely, yeah. And
I'm
desktop
notorious for my thoughts on
exercises.
ransomware.
And desktop exercises. I mean, the importance of practice makes perfect. The fact that, you're not, you don't want to be walking into your first incident room or war room, and this is your first go at it. I mean, you just don't want to be in that position. What can we tie up around those points before we close, Adam?
Yeah, so you've actually summarized it all really well. I think the key point everything we talk about now, every conference we go to, everyone talks about incident response and they talk about tabletop exercises now. I think the key to understanding the steps is that, by the way, one thing that it's so simple, but so many people forget it. If you are under attack and it's a ransomware and they've taken down the domain controllers, if someone like me or Robert walks in the room and goes, all right, where's your incident response plan? If the response is, oh, it's on the E drive and we can't get to it. So I always say you need an A3 folder that's red and 3 of them in different locations so that you can actually pull that bloody ripcord.
What an immense piece of advice. Yeah. Because
it's amazing how many people don't do it. Amazing how many people don't do it.
And it's not stupidity, because the people that are doing this stuff, I mean, it must be worth underlining that they're not stupid. It's just that,
it's because it's such a simple thing that smart people don't think about it.
Yeah.
I don't know what that says about me, because I think about it, but it's one of those things. And I have to admit, I actually got this idea from one of my insurance partners that I worked with. And it was like, they have a go bag, and anyone so they've already identified who's in the incident response room. And whenever whoever's in the incident response room has a go bag that they have in their office or in their car or something, and it's got like a clean device, a communication device, because if it's like a phone that gets nuked, then how are you going to communicate? Another thing that it's like a charging pack and a can of baked beans and zombie spray. But there's definitely a need for a go plan, and part of that go plan is you got to communicate. In the incident response playbook, you need to identify what the communication pathway is, so you don't have people on WhatsApp, people on Signal, people on Telegram, people on email, people on Gmail email, people on bloody pigeons flying over dropping messages in bottles. Like you want to know that everyone's on the same platform. So a lot of organizations actually set up, like once we come in and have these conversations about being prepared, they actually set up a WhatsApp group straight away. And it's like, right, you are in the incident management room. This is the incident management team conversation. And it's interesting that once they implement that, there's actually conversations that occur in there where that culture of vigilance kicks off. But as you were saying, like to wrap up those things, is there anything that that needs to also be considered? Is that when we talk about tabletop exercises or TTX or desktop exercises, the flow should always be, you start with a board level, executive level, paper-based half-day exercise, because if it goes for much longer, it gets pretty boring. So you do a half-day exercise and you're getting the executives across how this looks. So it's a very different kind of conversation where we cover the industry at large, their industry specifically, attacks that have occurred in their industry, then a little bit of an acid test of like a live injects and make it look like there's actually an attack and like simulate what an attack would look like, and guide them but don't tell them to refer to their incident response playbooks and let them work through the process. And it's interesting because like anytime we write an incident response playbook for someone, we then stipulate it has to be tested in a board level tabletop exercise. And then when we've done that tabletop exercise, we look at it afterwards and like we take the feedback and we sit with the board.
What are the learnings? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's like, what did you learn? What wasn't in the playbook? Or what could have been better in the playbook? So then they get back a refreshed playbook that's aligned to how their specific culture works. Because I think you said it, Nick, that it needs to, your incident response and your cybersecurity frameworks need to align to the culture of your business. Same thing, like these incident response playbooks and the way that you actually act under the most stressful thing that will happen in your business has to align to your culture. So it always starts with a board level exercise. And then the buy-in from the board is then next we do a live fire simulated or emulated exercise where we get the technical people to experience an actual attack in an offline environment or a separate environment to their own. And there is the big key focus there isn't you're going to get beaten up and you're going to lose. It is because no matter what you do, if you go in those cyber ranges, you're always going to get clobbered. But the idea is you do the capture the flag exercise and there's knowledge transfer and you have them, like you sit there, you guide, you give them access to the actual who's working against them so that they can learn. And then what we find is if you speak to any of those or anyone who's actually enjoying their job in cybersecurity, if you speak to them after one of those live fire exercises, they'll tell you it's probably the most exciting thing they've done in their job. And now they feel a little more prepared if the flag actually does
Maybe
pop
they
up.
feel a little bit more empowered as well, Adam. I don't know, but I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Robert, any thoughts before we close, mate?
I think the last thing I'll probably touch on is because we've sort of mentioned it a few times, but I just want to sort of state it clearly. We've sort of talked about impacts on business continuity, but a business continuity plan is not the same as an incident response plan. There is overlap, but I think it's really important to also look at how incident response fits into your business continuity plan, and also you should be testing your business continuity plan as well, not just specific incident response. And so this is things like you lose a site, how do you continue operations? But in this sort of case, and where there's overlap, if your systems go down, and we've talked about payroll, how do you continue to make payments? So do you have a clean laptop and you can go offsite, you can connect to the internet and you've got a SaaS solution for your payroll and you continue to make payroll? Or do you actually need to have some manual processes? Do you need to have checks that you need to write? So you need to be thinking through the broader business and how that might be impacted by a ransomware attack or business email compromise or whatever it might be, and how does the business continue to operate during that? So I think it's also key to make sure that you've got your business continuity and plan in place, and you're testing that as well.
So I'm going to shamelessly finish up on an advertorial. If anybody that's listening wants to understand how they might be able to run a desktop exercise, understand what documentation they may need, please do reach out. We've got Adam and Robert here who are experts in their field, and we'd be more than happy to make sure that you're put in contact. On that note, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. That was Chat DPS for this week, and we look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thanks for having me on.